The tomb guard didn't move, not for the rain, not for the murmurs behind the barrier, not for the tourists or the cameras. He stood motionless, as always. But then, something unexpected happened. Barack Obama, unannounced, stepped onto the plaza, and in that moment, everything shifted. Earlier that morning, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen had opened a letter from a long-deceased commander. It ended with a simple, powerful line: "I hope someone truly worthy sees what you do in silence, maybe even a president." And now, that very hope stood before him. When the guard broke protocol, stepped forward, and spoke just once, President Obama's expression crumbled. He reached for his glasses, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "I've never heard anything like that." Before we reveal exactly what the tomb guard said and how it deeply moved the former Commander-in-Chief, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen began his 1247th walk along the 63 feet of black mat in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier. 21 steps. South, turn, face east for 21 seconds, turn, face north for 21 seconds, turn. The rhythm had become as natural as breathing, as essential as his heartbeat. His M14 rifle gleamed in the dying light, its weight familiar in his white-gloved hands. Chen had been walking this path for 3 years now, through scorching summers and bitter winters, through rain that soaked through his wool uniform and snow that made each step treacherous. But he never faltered. The tomb guard's creed was etched into his soul: "My dedication to this sacred duty is total and wholehearted. In the responsibility bestowed on me, never will I falter. And with dignity and perseverance, my standard will remain perfection." The few remaining tourists watched in reverent silence as Chen executed his precise movements. An elderly veteran stood at attention, his arthritic hand trembling as he held a salute. A young mother whispered to her son about the importance of remembering those who served. But Chen's focus remained absolute, his eyes forward, his mind locked in the sacred ritual that had defined his life since that day in Afghanistan when everything changed. As the golden hour light filtered through the ancient oaks, Chen's trained peripheral vision caught movement near the memorial amphitheater. A lone figure approached, moving with the measured gait of someone who understood the weight of this place. The man wore a simple black overcoat, his hands clasped behind his back, his face set in lines of deep contemplation. It wasn't until the figure reached the marble plaza that Chen recognized him: Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. Obama stood motionless at the edge of the ceremonial area, his presence commanding yet respectful. He didn't approach the tomb itself, but remained at the prescribed distance, his dark eyes taking in the scene with the gravity it deserved. Chen continued his march, but something stirred in his chest, a recognition that went beyond mere celebrity or political position. This was a man who had carried the weight of a nation, who had made decisions that sent soldiers like Chen into harm's way, who had written letters to families who would never again hear their loved ones' voices. The president's gaze lingered on Chen's uniform ribbons, the Bronze Star with Valor device, the Purple Heart, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal. Each decoration told a story, marked a moment when duty transcended personal safety. Obama's own memories stirred as he watched the precise ceremony. He remembered the briefing rooms where he'd authorized missions, the late-night calls informing him of casualties, the weight of knowing that every decision rippled outward into real lives, real families, real consequences. Chen's military bearing remained flawless, but his mind drifted to that sweltering day in Kandahar province when his convoy had been ambushed. The IED had torn through their Humvee like tissue paper, killing 2 soldiers instantly and leaving their Afghan interpreter, Ali Nazari, pinned beneath twisted metal with his leg nearly severed. The enemy fire had been relentless, bullets pinging off the armored vehicle as Chen made a choice that would define the rest of his life. Ali had been screaming in Pashto, begging Chen to leave him behind, to save himself. The interpreter had been with Chen's unit for 8 months, guiding them through treacherous terrain, translating not just words but cultural nuances that kept American soldiers alive. He had a wife and 2 young daughters in Kabul, dreams of bringing them to America, of building a new life free from the constant threat of Taliban retribution. But Chen hadn't left him. Despite the shrapnel in his own leg, despite the blood streaming down his face from a head wound, Despite the very real possibility that they would both die in that kill zone, Chen had crawled back to the wreckage. He had lifted Ali's broken body and carried him 400 meters through enemy fire to the extraction point, taking 2 more bullets in the process, one in the shoulder, one that grazed his ribs. The president continued his vigil, unaware of the drama playing out. In Chen's memory, Obama's own thoughts turned to the families he had comforted, the flag ceremonies he had attended, the weight of command that never truly left a man's shoulders. He thought about the Purple Heart in his coat pocket, not his own, but one that had been entrusted to him by the family of Captain Ryan Jeffords, a Marine who had died saving his squad in Fallujah. As Chen completed another circuit of his march, the memories continued to flood back. Ollie had survived that day, but barely. The interpreter had spent months in a military hospital in Germany, enduring surgery after surgery to save his mangled leg. Chen had visited him whenever he could, bringing magazines, translating between Ollie and the doctors, becoming something more than just the soldier who had saved his life. During one of those visits, Ollie had pressed a letter into Chen's hands. It was written in broken English, the words carefully chosen by a man who was still learning the language of his adopted country. The letter spoke of brotherhood that transcended nationality, of sacrifice that knew no borders, of the weight that good men carried for others. Ollie had made Chen promise to keep the letter, to remember that the job wasn't about medals or glory. It was about carrying those who couldn't carry themselves. Obama shifted his weight slightly, the movement barely perceptible but enough to catch Chen's attention. The president's face bore the lines of a man who had aged rapidly under the burden of leadership, who had made impossible choices and lived with their consequences. There was something in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, of the shared weight that bound all those who had served in positions of responsibility. The Tomb Guard's march continued, but Chen's thoughts remained with Ali. The interpreter had eventually made it to America, settling in Virginia with his family. He had found work as a translator for the State Department, helping other refugees navigate the complex process of asylum. But the trauma of that day in Afghanistan had never fully left him. He walked with a permanent limp, woke most nights from dreams of gunfire and explosions, and carried his own invisible wounds. Chen's own recovery had been different, but no less challenging. The physical wounds had healed, leaving only scars and the occasional ache on cold mornings. But the psychological impact of that day had taken longer to process. He had struggled with survivor's guilt, with the question of why he had lived when others had died, with the weight of being called a hero, when he had simply done what any good soldier would do. The decision to become a tomb guard had been born from that struggle. Here, at Arlington, he could honor not just the unknown soldiers who lay beneath the marble, but all those who had served and sacrificed. Each step of his march was a prayer, each turn a moment of remembrance, each hour of duty a way of carrying forward the memory of those who could no longer carry themselves. Obama's presence at the tomb was not unprecedented. He had visited Arlington many times during his presidency, laying wreaths, comforting families, honoring the fallen. But this visit was different. This was personal. The Purple Heart in his pocket belonged to a young Marine who had thrown himself on a grenade to save his squad. A 23-year-old from Ohio, who had written letters to his parents about wanting to make a difference in the world. Captain Ryan Jeffords had died on a Tuesday morning in Fallujah, his last act one of supreme sacrifice. His parents had given Obama the Purple Heart not as a political gesture, but as a request. They wanted it to go to someone who would understand its weight, someone who carried others the way their son had carried his men. They had asked Obama to find the right person, to pass on their son's legacy to someone worthy of it. Chen continued his methodical pace, unaware of the drama unfolding in the president's mind. The Tomb Guard's dedication was absolute. He had trained for months to earn this position, memorizing the history of Arlington, the stories of the unknown soldiers, the precise movements that honored their sacrifice. He had given up normal social interactions, romantic relationships, the typical pleasures of a man in his 20s, all in service to this sacred duty. The president watched as Chen executed another perfect turn, his movements sharp and precise despite having performed them thousands of times. There was something in the young soldier's bearing that spoke to Obama, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their different stations in life. Both men had chosen to serve something greater than themselves. Both had carried burdens that others could not see. Both had made sacrifices that went largely unrecognized, that as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, Obama made a decision that would surprise even himself. He had intended to pay his respects silently and leave, as he had done so many times before. But something about this moment, about this particular guard, about the weight of the medal in his pocket, compelled him to break with protocol. The few remaining tourists began to disperse as the evening shadows lengthened. The changing of the guard ceremony had concluded hours earlier, and Chen's solitary vigil would continue through the night. This was the most sacred time at the tomb. When the crowds were gone, when the only witnesses were the marble sentinels and the souls of the fallen, Obama stepped forward, his movement deliberate and respectful. He remained outside the ceremonial area, but his presence was now unmistakable. Chen's peripheral vision registered the approach, but his training kept him focused on his duty. The president waited, patient as the man before him completed his circuit, understanding that this ritual was bigger than any individual, more important than any conversation. When Chen reached the northern end of his march and executed his turn, Obama spoke not loudly, but with the carrying voice of a man accustomed to addressing crowds. "Sergeant Chen," he said simply, using the respectful tone he had learned to employ with all service members. The use of his name caused Chen to pause for just a fraction of a second, a breach in protocol so slight that only he would notice it, but the president's voice carried something that made Chen's carefully controlled composure begin to crack. It wasn't the authority of office or the weight of celebrity. It was the voice of one soldier speaking to another, one man who had carried others, recognizing another who had done the same. Chen completed his movement and faced north, his body rigid with military precision, but his mind was racing. No one spoke to the tomb guards during their vigil. No one broke the sacred silence that surrounded this place. And yet, something in the president's tone suggested that this was not a casual interruption, but something more profound. Obama continued to wait, understanding that he had introduced chaos into a carefully ordered world. He had spent enough time around military personnel to know that discipline was more than just following orders. It was a way of life, a commitment to something larger than oneself. He respected the ritual he was interrupting, even as he felt compelled to break it. The weight of the Purple Heart in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Captain Jefford's parents had entrusted him with more than just a piece of metal. They had given him the responsibility of finding someone worthy of their son's sacrifice. As he watched Chen maintain his perfect posture, despite the obvious internal struggle, Obama began to understand that he had found that person. The president's thoughts turned to the countless briefings he had received about soldiers like Chen, men and women who had performed acts of extraordinary courage in distant lands. He had signed letters to their families, attended their funerals, awarded their medals, but he had rarely had the opportunity to speak with them directly, to understand the weight they carried long after the battles had ended. As Chen reached the southern end of his march, Obama made his decision. "Sergeant," he said again, his voice carrying across the marble plaza, "I have something that belongs to you." The words hung in the air like a challenge to the natural order. Chen's training screamed at him to ignore the interruption, to maintain his focus on the sacred duty before him. But something in the president's tone suggested that this was itself a sacred duty, that the interruption was not disrespect but recognition. Chen completed his turn and faced east, his internal struggle intensifying. The tomb guard's creed was absolute. Nothing could interfere with his duty to honor the unknown soldiers. But the president's presence felt different, as if it were part of the honor rather than a distraction from it. Obama stepped closer, still maintaining respectful distance but closing the gap between them. "I know this breaks protocol," he said quietly, "but some things are more important than protocol." The president reached into his coat and withdrew a small wooden box, worn smooth by years of handling. He held it in both hands, treating it with the reverence due to a sacred relic. "This belonged to Captain Ryan Jeffords," Obama said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "He died saving his squad in Fallujah. His parents wanted it to go to someone who would understand." Chen's perfect posture wavered almost imperceptibly. The name meant nothing to him, but the gesture meant everything. He had received his own Purple Heart in a sterile ceremony, one medal among many distributed to wounded soldiers. But this was different. This was personal, a connection between warriors across time and space. The president continued, his words measured and deliberate. They said I would know the right person when I found them. Someone who had carried others, who understood the weight of service, who honored the fallen not with words but with action. Obama's eyes met Chun's for the first time, and in that moment, both men recognized something in each other. The president saw the same dedication he had witnessed in countless service members, the same quiet strength that had carried America through its darkest hours. Chen saw not the politician or the celebrity, but the man who had carried the weight of a nation, who had made impossible decisions and lived with their consequences. The tomb guard's resolve finally cracked. Protocol demanded that he ignore the interruption, but humanity demanded that he respond. Kuhn's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, not because he was afraid of breaking silence, but because the moment seemed too sacred for loud words. "Sir," Chen said, his military bearing intact, despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this honor." Obama smiled sadly, recognizing the humility that marked true heroes. "That's exactly why you are," he replied. "Heroes never think they're heroes, they just do what needs to be done." The president extended the box toward Chen, who accepted it with trembling hands. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, as if it contained not just a medal, but the accumulated sacrifice of all those who had served. Captain Jeffords was 23, Obama continued, his voice thick with emotion. Fresh out of college, wanted to be a teacher when he got back. But when that grenade rolled into his squad's position, he didn't hesitate. He threw himself on it, saved 6 men he'd known for less than a year. Chen's hands tightened on the box. The story was familiar, not the specific details, but the theme. He had seen too many good soldiers make the ultimate sacrifice, too many families shattered by the cost of service. The weight of their memory was part of what drove him to this post, to this eternal vigil. "I carried something similar," Chen said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Obama lean forward to hear. "Not a medal, but a letter, from a man I saved in Afghanistan. He told me that the job wasn't about the medals or the glory, it was about carrying those who couldn't carry themselves." Obama's eyes widened slightly. Here was the confirmation he had been seeking, the proof that he had found the right person. "Would you share that letter?" he asked, not as a president making a request, but as one human being seeking connection with another. Chen's hand moved to his breast pocket, where he carried Ali's letter every day. It was against regulations to carry personal items while on duty, but the letter had become part of his ritual, part of his remembrance. He withdrew it carefully, the paper worn soft from years of handling. The letter was written in Ollie's careful handwriting, the English stilted but heartfelt. Obama read it aloud, his voice carrying across the marble plaza. "My dear friend Marcus, you carried me when I could not carry myself. You risked your life for mine when you had every reason to leave me behind. This is the job, you told me later. Not the medals, not the glory, not the recognition. Just carry them, carry the wounded, carry the fallen, carry the memory of those who cannot carry themselves. You are a good man, Marcus Chen. You carry others, and now I carry the memory of your goodness with me to my new life in America. We are brothers now, bound not by blood but by the weight we carry together. Never forget, the job is to carry them." The words hung in the air between them, a bridge connecting to men who had never met but shared the same burden. Obama's hands trembled as he folded the letter and returned it to Chen, understanding now that the young soldier before him was exactly what Captain Jeffords' parents had been looking for. "Ali made it to America," Chen said quietly, his voice carrying across the years. "He's in Virginia now, working as a translator for the State Department. He helps other refugees, carries them through the process of starting over. He still limps from that day, still wakes up from nightmares, but he carries on." Obama nodded, understanding the continuation of the story. "And you carry him," he said simply. "You carry his memory, his gratitude, his example, just as you carry the unknown soldiers here." The president's words hit Chen like a physical blow. For 3 years, he had walked this path, performed this ritual, maintained this vigil, but he had never fully understood the connection between his service here and his service in Afghanistan. Both were about carrying others, about maintaining the memory of those who had sacrificed, about ensuring that their stories continued to be told. "Captain Jeffords' parents asked me to find someone who would carry their son's memory forward," Obama continued. "Someone who understood that heroism isn't about the moment of glory, but about the lifetime of service that follows." someone who would honor not just the medal, but the man who earned it. Chun's eyes filled with tears he couldn't shed, emotions he couldn't express while on duty. But Obama saw them anyway, recognized the struggle between duty and humanity that defined the best of those who served. The sun had fully set now, and the tomb was illuminated by the eternal flame and the soft glow of the memorial's lighting. The few remaining tourists had departed, leaving only the two men and the silent sentinels of marble. This was the most sacred time at Arlington, when the living and the dead seemed closest. When the weight of memory pressed down like a physical presence, Obama stepped back, giving Chen space to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The Purple Heart and the wooden box represented more than just one soldier's sacrifice. It was a link in an unbroken chain of service, a continuation of the story that Chen had been telling with every step of his march. "I should let you return to your duty," Obama said, but his words carried no urgency. He understood that this moment was part of Chen's duty, that accepting the responsibility of carrying Captain Jefford's memory was as important as any ceremonial movement. Chen stood straighter, his military bearing reasserting itself. But something had changed in his posture, a subtle shift that spoke of acceptance, of understanding. "Sir," he said, his voice stronger now, "permission to continue my watch." Obama nodded, recognizing the formal request for what it was, not a dismissal, but an acknowledgement that Chun's duty had expanded to include this new responsibility. "Granted," he said simply, then added, "Thank you, Sergeant, for carrying them all." The president turned to leave, his footsteps echoing across the marble plaza, but he paused at the edge of the ceremonial area, looking back at Chen, who had resumed his methodical march. The young soldier's movements were the same, but his bearing had changed, not in any way that would be visible to casual observers, but in a way that Obama recognized as the acceptance of a sacred trust. As Chen completed his circuit and turned to face north, Obama made his final observation. The tomb guard was no longer just maintaining a vigil for the unknown soldiers beneath the marble. He was carrying the memory of Captain Jeffords, of Ali Nazari, of all those who had served and sacrificed. Each step was a prayer, each turn a moment of remembrance, each hour of duty a way of ensuring that their stories continued to be told. 1 year later, Obama returned to Arlington for another private visit. The tomb guard on duty was a different soldier, but the ritual remained the same. 21 steps, turn, pause, turn. The eternal flame flickered in the evening breeze, and the marble sentinels stood there silent watch. But something had changed. In the visitor center, mounted in a place of honor, was a shadow box containing Captain Jefford's Purple Heart. The accompanying plaque read simply, "For those who carry others, in memory of Captain Ryan Jeffords, USMC, and all who continue." His mission of service, Chun's own story had continued to unfold. He had completed his tour as a tomb guard with the same dedication he had shown that evening, but his understanding of his duty had been transformed. He had gone on to become an instructor, teaching new guards not just the precision of their movements, but the meaning behind them. He spoke of carrying others, of the weight of memory, of the connection between the living and the dead. Obama stood before the shadow box, reading the plaque and remembering that evening when two men had found connection in the midst of sacred duty. The Purple Heart gleamed in its case, but its true power lay not in the metal but in the story it told, a story of sacrifice, of recognition, of the unbroken chain of service that connected all those who chose to carry others. The president's thoughts turned to the countless other moments like this one, scattered across the world and across time. In every generation, in every conflict, there were those who chose to carry others, sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically, but always with the same spirit of service that had driven Captain Jeffords to sacrifice his life, Chen to save Ollie, and Obama himself to bear the weight of a nation's decisions. As he prepared to leave, Obama caught sight of the current tomb guard executing his perfect turn. The young soldier's face was set in lines of concentration, his movements precise and deliberate, but in his bearing, Obama recognized the same dedication he had seen in Chen. The same understanding that this duty was about more than ceremony. It was about carrying the memory of those who had given everything in service to others. The sun set over Arlington National Cemetery, casting long shadows across the rows of white headstones. The eternal flame flickered in the gathering darkness, and the tomb guard continued his methodical march. 21 steps south, turn, pause, turn, each movement a prayer, each step a promise, to carry them, to remember them, to ensure that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. In the distance, the lights of Washington, D.C. twinkled like stars, a reminder of the nation these soldiers had served and died to protect. And in the visitor center, Captain Jefford's Purple Heart gleamed in its case, a symbol of the unbroken chain of service that connected all those who chose to carry others in life, in death, and in the eternal vigil of memory.